In a very cold Siberia, this Airbus A321 from S7 Airlines was taking off on a routine passenger flight. Shortly after takeoff, the crew found themselves in a really awkward situation, and the problems didn't stop there. To see what happens and why, stay tuned. Just before we start, I would just like to quickly apologise for my voice in this video. I am just recovering from a cold, so I'll sound a little bit off and hopefully it isn't too distracting. Anyway, on with the video. On the 4th of December 2021, S7 Airlines flight 5220 was flying from Magadan Airport to Novosibirsk in Russia. The aircraft was an Airbus A321neo and was carrying 202 passengers and 7 crew. There was a very experienced flight crew on board. The pilot in command was 56 years old and had a total of 14,476 flying hours, with 11,140 on type. The co-pilot was 56 years old and had a total of 6,398 flying hours, with 6,248 on type. Prior to this flight, the aircraft had been parked for 2.5 hours in heavy snowfall, where the temperature ranged between -9 and -12 degrees Celsius. Due to this, the aircraft had become covered in thick snow and would require de-icing before its next departure. Now, the de-icing procedure is something very important, and it's actually in 2 parts. So you have a de-icing part where the snow and the ice is melted away, and once this is complete, the aircraft can then receive an anti-ice treatment that will protect the aircraft against recontamination. This is important in places where the temperature is particularly cold, as melting the ice away will cause the water to refreeze in an untreated area. Included in this process is something called holdover time, and this is the time between the final part of the de-ice process and the point in which the de-ice or anti-ice fluid loses its protection effectiveness. The time will vary depending on the de-ice process, the fluids used, and the conditions the aircraft is in. You may have had it in the past where an aircraft has been de-iced, but then experienced a delay, meaning that it's now outside of that safe limit. It will then require the old anti-ice fluid to be removed and a new process carried out. This is all carried out for the safety of the aircraft and its passengers, as ice and aircraft are not a good match. So the flight crew initiated the de-icing procedure and requested that only the wing and stabilizer upper surfaces were treated, leaving the fuselage untouched. It is believed that this decision was made as the snowfall was determined to be of a fluffy consistency and not wet. Therefore, it will be blown off during takeoff. Some airfields are able to blow off this snow with compressed air, but at Magadan Airport, they did not have this facility. During the de-ice procedure, Type 1 fluid was administered first, followed by Type 4 fluid. The de-icing process lasted approximately 24 minutes, during which time the crew were able to get an up-to-date weather. This informed them that the wind was at 040 degrees at 2 meters per second, visibility was currently 300 meters, there was heavy snow showers, and the temperature was -10 degrees Celsius. There were also 2 NOTAMs, which at the time stood for Notice to Airmen, which warned the crew of issues that could affect their flight. For Magadan Airport, they had a wind shear warning issued from the 1st of December, starting at 21:30 hours to 1100 hours on the 2nd. And they also had a SIGMET issued for severe turbulence starting from 2200 hours on the 1st of December to 0200 hours on the 2nd. Now, SIGMET stands for a significant meteorological information, and it is information that informs the crew of an occurrence or expected occurrence of weather which may affect the safety of the aircraft operations. Further to this, a departing Tu-96 had just reported to air traffic control that there was moderate icing at 900 meters, although it is not clear if this was reported back to the crew of flight 5220. With the crew happy to continue, and after the de-icing was complete, the crew requested to start their engines. Shortly after, the crew received their taxi instructions and taxied to runway 10. During the taxi, the crew noticed they still had some snow build-up around the windscreen and turned on the windscreen heat and carried out their pre-takeoff checks. By the time they'd got to their taxi holding point, the snow had melted and the windscreens had now cleared. They then received a weather update from air traffic control, and they informed the crew that the wind was at 060 at 2 meters per second, visibility was over 10 kilometers, there were heavy snow showers, 5 octar clouds at 180 meters, So the octar system basically breaks up the sky above the airfield into 8 separate parts, and the amount of cloud that covers that up will give you the amount of octars. So for example, if it's 8, it'll be overcast. If it's 0, it'll be completely clear. So you might have heard 5 octars in this situation as described as broken in the past. There were reports of cumulonimbus clouds, severe turbulence warning was in effect for the aerodrome, and there was a chance of moderate icing and wind shear from the ground to flight level 150. After the update had been given, at 0042 hours, they were cleared for takeoff. As the engines roared into life and the aircraft began to roll down the runway, the snow that had accumulated on the top had started to blow off as expected. The aircraft then took off and received further clearance to climb to flight level 160. Now during the early stages of takeoff and the climb, everything appeared normal and the crew were just starting to settle into their flight. All of a sudden, the autopilot disengaged and for a single second the stall warning system operated. The pilot in command and co-pilot looked around the cockpit and they noticed that they were receiving difference in airspeed indications. The crew quickly took manual control of the aircraft and started to problem solve and try and diagnose what the issue was. The time was now 0047 hours, just 5 minutes after takeoff, and the co-pilot now issued a Mayday call to air traffic control, stating that they were receiving inaccurate speed readings and they are going to return to Magadan Airport. During the call, the aircraft entered the reported cloud, which contained icing and turbulence. This was now a very uncomfortable flight for the passengers, and it was going to get worse. Still in the climb, the crew received another stall warning, and at this point, the pilot in command took control from the co-pilot and turned off the autothrottle. He now manually controlled the thrust, and the crew then leveled the aircraft at 8,900 feet and started to turn back towards the airfield. They now started their descent from 8,900 feet, and on the bumpy ride down, the crew attempted to re-engage the autopilot 3 times. All attempts were unsuccessful, and the autopilot remained off for the rest of the flight. As the aircraft passed 4,800 feet, the crew received an overspeed warning, and the aircraft was showing that they were flying at 370 knots, which exceeded the maximum allowable speed. At this moment, the pilot in command vigorously deflected the side control stick to cause the aircraft to pitch up. The maneuver was so vigorous that it caused the aircraft to climb with a vertical speed of 17,300 feet per minute. This pitch was held for 39 seconds with the force of 2G pressing down on the aircraft and the passengers. The aircraft quickly climbed to 13,800 feet, and then the aircraft started to shudder. It then started to roll to the left before then entering a stall. The roll angle is 30 degrees to the left, and the pilot in command pushed the control stick to its maximum right and started to balance the aircraft with the rudder. As the aircraft starts to respond to the right input, the pilot in command now pushes fully to the left to counter the continued roll to the right. Meanwhile, the co-pilot is also trying to combat the upset position, mostly pitching down but also trying to roll the aircraft. Because of this dual input, the aircraft logic and system within the Airbus A321 means that the signals sent from each of the side sticks are added together but reduced so that the movement is never greater than the maximum deflection of a single side stick. This means that because the crew were attempting to resolve different issues, the aircraft wasn't responding how either of them were expecting. The crew are now informed that there was a fault of Air Data Reference 1, 2, and 3. Now, Air Data Reference, ADR, is a component of the ADIRU, which is an Air Data Inertial Reference Unit, and this provides airspeed and barometric altitude data. So these faults were only shown for a few seconds, but this would explain the erroneous airspeed and altitude data the crew were receiving. With the plane still in a stall, with the altitude decreasing, the crew find themselves at 12,400 feet and still fighting against the roll of the aircraft. 14 minutes after the incident first began, the co-pilot now stops trying to control the aircraft, with the pilot in command now having sole control. The roll of the aircraft finally stabilizes, the nose starts to drop, and the crew starts to regain control and exit the stalled position. Now in a position to continue their approach to Magadan Airport, the crew line the aircraft up for the approach. During the descent, the airspeed indicated above the max speed and the alarm sounded again. The crew selected the autothrottle on, but the thrust started to increase, so the crew turned off the autothrottle again. The pilot in command pitched up to reduce the speed. The speed started to decay, and the overspeed warning stopped as the aircraft indicated the speed was below 350 knots. Because of this, they were unable to continue with their approach and started to position themselves again for another attempt. The crew now switched on the autothrottle again and continued to descend to 4,500 feet. Again, the overspeed warning alerted, and the crew pitched the aircraft up, climbing again, this time reaching 9,900 feet, and they disabled the autothrottle. At this time, the stall warning activated again. The pilot in command leveled at 11,500 feet, with the stall warning stopping, and now started to look for other options. The 202 passengers and 5 cabin crew are going through a scary situation. The incident so far had only lasted 23 minutes, but confidence for a successful landing was starting to fade. The crew decided they needed to try something different, and they decided to fly to their alternative airfield of Yakutsk. It was hoped that the weather would be better and the transit time would allow for problem solving to take place. As they turned away from Magadan airfield, they informed S7 Control Center of the situation. It was recommended that they divert to Irkutsk instead. The crew agreed, and the aircraft flew for another 4 hours. During this time, the issues with the aircraft improved, with the speed and altitude now comparing and matching the actions of the aircraft. As they arrived in Irkutsk, mercifully, the crew flew a normal approach, and at 05:15 hours, after 4.5 hours of flight, the aircraft landed safely, and all 202 passengers and 7 crew exited the aircraft without any injury. So what was happening to the aircraft just after it took off? Well, what actually happened is almost unbelievable. When the aircraft landed in Irkutsk, there was evidence and remnants of large ice deposits on the wings and on the front of the aircraft. It is believed that this ice interfered with the pitot-static tubes that determine the aircraft's speed and altitude. But how could this have happened? Icing is a well-known issue with aircraft, and these systems are heated to prevent ice from affecting them. The issue started when the aircraft was de-iced. There are several issues with this process. It was carried out during heavy snow, which didn't allow for any of the protective action by the fluid. Second, it was recommended that 230 litres of Type 4 fluid be used for the Airbus A321neo, but only 99 litres was used. But finally, and the most crucial part, was the decision to only clear the wings and rear stabiliser. This meant that the snow was not removed from the front of the fuselage or around the cockpit windows. This meant that during the aircraft taxi, when the crew switched on the window heat, it melted the snow and the water ran down to the untreated fuselage, refreezing in front of the pitot tubes, creating a barrier of ice that disrupted the airflow. This meant that the aircraft could not read the speed or altitude of the aircraft correctly because the airflow was completely disrupted, either speeding up over the ice or being blocked completely. Other contributing factors to this incident was the turbulent air, icing, and disproportionate control inputs by the pilots, including the dual input when both flight crew were trying to fly the plane. These all added to the issue and made it difficult for the aircraft to return to normal operations. There were also news reports that the anti-ice fluid that was used was not legitimate, but this could not be confirmed. Again, like I said at the start of the video, this was translated from the Russian final report, so hopefully all the information is accurate and not lost in translation. I did also double check with other sources to corroborate the information, so I'm sure it is all correct. Again, also sorry for my voice in this video, I am just recovering from a little cold. And finally, if you want to help support the channel, please do check out the merchandise store. There's loads of stuff on there that's not just based on this channel, it's aviation related, all designed by me, and I think it will make a great gift for somebody. I've also partnered with a company that should be able to produce it as close to your address as possible and reduce on those delivery times. But that's all we have for today. Thank you for listening this long, and I'll see you in the next one.